I'm Alex, 29, female, and my mother just told me I wasn't part of the real group at our family dinner. It wasn't screamed in a fit of anger or whispered as a venomous secret. She said it with the casual, dismissive air one might use to point out a scuff on a shoe. The words were a simple statement of fact in her world, and in that moment, they shattered the fragile glass house of hope I'd been building for nearly 3 decades. The whole disaster started, as most of them did, with a phone call from my mother, Carol, a week earlier. Her voice on the line was unusually bright, a syrupy sweet tone that should have been my first red flag. It was the voice she used when she was about to ask for a favor or when she was trying to smooth over a recent transgression with a flimsy layer of charm. "Alex, darling," she'd begun, and I could already feel the familiar tension coiling in my stomach. "Your father and I were thinking it's been too long since we all had a proper family dinner. Just us. We've booked a table at the Gilded Spoon for next Tuesday. A quick dinner with family. Can you make it?" The Gilded Spoon, not a casual Tuesday night spot. It was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, the kind of place where dessert menus came with their own sommeliers, and the lighting was engineered to make everyone look like a movie star. A quick dinner, there was like calling a marathon a quick jog. My logical mind, the one I used every day as a financial analyst to see the patterns and predict the outcomes, screamed at me. "It's a trap. There's a catch. This is not for you." But another part of me, a younger, more foolish part that never seemed to learn its lesson, piped up with a pathetic flicker of hope. "Maybe this time is different. Maybe they finally see you. Maybe they want to celebrate you." "Wow, Mom, the Gilded Spoon? That's a big deal. What's the occasion?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. There was a slight hesitation on her end. "Oh, no occasion, dear. Just family. It's important to make time for family, you know." The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. My family didn't do big deals without an occasion, and the occasion was never, ever me. Still, I pushed the doubt down. I was a master at it. Forcing down doubt was a survival skill I'd learned at my mother's knee, right alongside learning to tie my shoes. "Okay," I said, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Yes, I can be there. What time?" 7:30, and Alex wear something nice. The second red flag. As if I, a professional woman who worked in a corporate downtown office, needed to be reminded of a dress code. It was her subtle way of reminding me of my place, of suggesting that I might not inherently know how to fit in. For the rest of the week, I let that fragile hope grow. I imagined what this dinner could be. Maybe they'd heard about the successful project I just led at work. It was a long shot, as my career was usually met with a polite but vacant, "That's nice, dear." My job, with its complex spreadsheets and market analyses, was invisible to them compared to my brother's life. My older brother, Leo, was the sun around which our family solar system orbited. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He had followed the pre-approved life script, a sensible degree in marketing, a quick marriage to his college sweetheart, Megan, a stable job at a mid-level firm, and 2 bright, bubbly children. He had provided my parents with the 2 things they craved most: grandchildren and bragging rights. His life was a series of comprehensible, easily celebrated milestones. His wedding was the social event of the year. The purchase of his suburban home was marked with a massive housewarming party. His promotion to senior marketing coordinator was announced in the family Christmas letter. My life, in contrast, was a string of achievements they found bewildering and therefore unimpressive. I had graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance, a notoriously difficult program. The celebration consisted of my parents taking me to a chain restaurant for lunch, where my father, Richard, spent most of the time complaining about the traffic on the way over. A year later, when Leo graduated with a B+ average, they threw a catered party for over 100 people in their backyard. My father gave a tearful speech about how proud he was. I stood in the back, holding a paper plate of lukewarm potato salad, feeling like a ghost at my own family's celebration. The incidents piled up over the years, each one a small paper cut, insignificant on its own but collectively bleeding me dry of any sense of belonging. There was the time I was on track for a huge promotion. I had a final, critical networking dinner with the partners at my firm, something I had been working towards for months. At 4 p.m. that day, my mother called in a panic. "Alex, thank goodness I reached you. It's an emergency," she'd cried. "Leo and Megan had something come up, a last-minute crisis, and I'm already committed to my book club. We need you to watch the kids. It's a real-life family emergency." The guilt was a physical force, expertly applied. I pictured a hospital, a crisis, something terrible. I canceled my dinner, making a clumsy, career-damaging excuse to my boss. I raced over to Leo's house, my heart pounding with anxiety, only to find the kids happily playing video games. When I asked the babysitter my parents had originally arranged what the emergency was, she shrugged. "Oh, Mr. and Mrs. last name. Just said they got last-minute tickets to see that new action movie everyone's talking about." I wasn't a sister. I was a contingency plan. I wasn't a daughter. I was a resource. The worst part was that when I confronted Leo about it later, he just laughed it off. "Oh, relax, Alex. You take things so seriously. It was just a movie. You can have a business dinner anytime." He truly didn't see it because he'd never had to. The world was designed for his convenience, and I was just a part of the design. My greatest professional achievement to date, making partner at my firm before the age of 30, was met with the most soul-crushing response of all. I called my parents, buzzing with the news, my voice trembling with pride. After I explained what it meant, the culmination of years of relentless work and sacrifice, there was a brief pause on my mother's end. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her voice distant. "That's very nice. But listen, I have to tell you the most adorable thing. Your nephew, little Ben, scored his first goal in his soccer game today. Your father got it all on video. He was so brave. He just ran right at the ball." A soccer goal. A 5-year-old's soccer goal was more real, more valuable, more worthy of excitement than the biggest moment of my adult life. That was the moment I should have given up. I should have packed away that foolish, hopeful part of myself and accepted the reality of my position. But I didn't, because this time the invitation was to the Gilded Spoon. And so, on that Tuesday night, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the collar of a tasteful and expensive silk blouse. I had chosen a sophisticated, understated outfit, tailored black trousers, the blouse, and modest heels. I looked successful, put together, and I hoped undeniably a part of the nice world they were aspiring to for the evening. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and walked out the door, straight into the ambush that had been waiting for me my entire life. The valet at the Gilded Spoon greeted me with a polite nod as I pulled up. The restaurant was even more impressive in person than it was in magazines. A grand, carved wooden door opened into a lobby of marble and hushed elegance. A beautiful host, who looked like she'd been personally selected by a casting director, smiled warmly at me from behind a polished mahogany podium. "Good evening, welcome to the Gilded Spoon," she said. "Hello, I'm here for a reservation under the name Richard or Carol," I said, my heart giving a hopeful little flutter. Maybe they were all waiting in the lobby for me. Maybe we would walk to the table together. The host's smile didn't falter as she scanned her screen. "Ah, yes, the Richard party. They've already been seated. Right this way." The flutter in my chest died, replaced by a familiar, dull ache. They were already here. They hadn't waited. It was a small thing, but it was the first crack in the hopeful facade I had so carefully constructed. The host led me from the grand lobby into the main dining room, a cavernous space with soaring ceilings, glittering chandeliers, and the gentle, melodic hum of quiet conversation and clinking silverware. And then I saw them. They weren't tucked away in some corner booth. They were at the best table in the entire restaurant, a large, circular table set right in the center of the room, a veritable island of familial bliss. My father, Richard, was at the head, beaming like a king holding court. My mother, Carol, sat beside him, looking radiant and laughing at something my brother, Leo, was saying. Leo, his wife Megan, and their 2 children, Ben and Maya, were all there, their faces glowing in the warm, golden light. They looked like an advertisement for a perfect life. They were all there, and they had already started. A bread basket was half empty, and glasses of what looked like sparkling apple juice were in front of the kids. The adults were holding flutes of champagne. They were toasting. They had started the celebration without me. The host led me towards them, and as we drew closer, I could feel the atmosphere shift. It was as if a bubble of cold air was expanding out from me, a bubble of otherness. My brother Leo was the first to spot me. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He nudged Megan, who glanced up, her own polite smile becoming a little more fixed, a little more brittle. Finally, my mother looked up. Her expression wasn't one of welcome. It wasn't, "Oh, Alex, you're here. We're so happy to see you." It was a look of mild surprise, as if a minor complication had just presented itself. "Oh, Alex, hello," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet dining room. I stopped at the edge of the table, feeling like a stranger who had wandered into a private party. The host stood beside me, a silent, professional witness to my impending humiliation. "Hi, Mom. Hi, everyone," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. My father gave me a half-hearted wave, already turning back to a story Leo was telling. The kids barely registered my presence. It was my mother who took charge of the situation, of me. She gestured vaguely with her champagne flute, not towards the empty chair I had assumed was for me, but towards the back of the restaurant, in the general direction of the clattering sounds of the kitchen. And then she said the words that would echo in my head for years to come. "There's a small table for you in the back," she said, her tone utterly matter-of-fact. "You can sit there, we need the space here for the real group." The real group. The phrase landed not like a punch, but like a perfectly aimed anesthetic dart. The sound in the room seemed to fade into a dull roar. The golden light of the chandelier suddenly felt harsh and interrogating. I looked at the faces around the table. Leo was now intensely studying the wine list, refusing to meet my eyes. His wife, Megan, gave me a small, pitying smile that was somehow worse than any insult. My father, my own father, was busying himself by carefully, meticulously, folding his napkin into a perfect square. They were all accomplices. They had all known. This was the plan all along. The empty chair I'd seen wasn't for me. It was for the mountain of designer shopping bags and gift boxes piled on it. They hadn't just come for dinner. They had been on a shopping spree, and this dinner was the grand finale. And I, it was now clear, was not part of the main event. I was the audience, relegated to the cheap seats. My entire life, I had felt like I was on the outside looking in, but I had always told myself it was just a feeling, a misinterpretation. But here it was, stated plainly. I was not part of the real group. The family I had spent my life trying to earn a place in had just drawn a literal, physical line in the sand, or in this case, in the plush carpeting of a Michelin-starred restaurant. The host, to her credit, looked mortified. Her professional veneer cracked for just a second, and I saw a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes before she smoothed it over. Something inside me, that young, hopeful part that had been so excited just 10 minutes before, finally broke. But it didn't break into tears or hysterics. It shattered into a million pieces of cold, hard, glittering ice. The chronic ache of trying and failing was replaced by a sudden, stunning clarity. The exhaustion of constantly fighting for a scrap of affection vanished, and in its place was a profound, chilling calm. I looked at my mother, at her perfectly composed face, at the family that was real, while I was apparently a phantom, and I gave her the one thing she never expected from me. I nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet but steady. I turned to the stunned host. "Would you mind showing me to my table?" The host led me away from the bright, laughing island of my family and into the dimmer, less glamorous straits of the restaurant. My table wasn't just in the back. It was a tiny, sad-looking circle for two, crammed into an awkward alcove right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter or busboy burst through, a wave of hot air, clattering dishes, and shouted orders washed over me. It wasn't a table for a guest. It was a table for a staff member on a break. It was a table for someone who didn't matter. I sat down, my back to my family, but I could still hear them. I could hear my mother's high-pitched laugh, my father's booming voice telling what was probably an old, tired joke, and the squeals of my niece and nephew. They had already forgotten me. My dismissal was so complete, so absolute, that my presence had evaporated from their consciousness the second I walked away. I was out of sight, and therefore entirely out of mind. For a few minutes, I just sat there, my hands folded on the table, and let the sheer, unadulterated humiliation sink in. This was a new low. Lower than the forgotten graduation, lower than the fake babysitting emergency, lower than the soccer goal that eclipsed my career. This was a public declaration. They had brought me to this temple of status and elegance specifically to show me that I did not belong. A waiter, different from the one serving their table, approached me cautiously. He had a kind, tired face. He'd probably seen 100 little dramas play out in this restaurant, but my situation, a single woman banished to the worst table while her family celebrated 20 feet away, must have been a novelty. "Ma'am, can I get you something to drink?" he asked gently. I looked up at him, and through the fog of my own shock, an idea began to form. It started as a tiny spark of rebellion, a mischievous little thought. What would they do if I wasn't there to pick up the check? Because that was the other part of this ritual, wasn't it? For all their dismissal of my career, they were never shy about enjoying its financial fruits. I had lost count of the number of family meals where my dad would loudly announce he was treating everyone, only to conveniently forget his wallet, leaving me to quietly and shamefully pick up the tab to avoid a scene. I was the family's silent benefactor, the unacknowledged sponsor of their good times. They had ordered champagne. They were at a place where a single steak cost more than my weekly groceries. They were digging in, completely secure in the knowledge that, in the end, Alex would take care of it. The spark of rebellion roared into a bonfire. Oh no, not this time. "Yes," I said to the kind waiter, my voice clear and firm. "I'll just have a club soda with lime, please." "Of course, and will you be ordering dinner?" "No," I said, offering him a small, genuine smile. "Just the drink, and could you please bring the check for it right away? I'll need to be leaving shortly." He nodded, a little confused, and hurried off. While he was gone, I pulled my wallet from my purse. I took out my corporate credit card, the sleek black card that represented so many years of my hard work, the work they ignored and belittled. The waiter returned with my club soda and a small bill folder. I placed my card inside without even looking at the total. "Thank you," I said, handing it back to him. "And could you do me a small favor? Please close my tab out completely now. I don't want to leave anything open." "Certainly, ma'am." He took it and disappeared toward the register. This was it, the point of no return. My heart was starting to hammer in my chest, a mixture of terror and wild, exhilarating adrenaline. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect. It was a final, desperate attempt to hold a mirror up to their faces. When the waiter returned with my card and the receipt to sign, I took a deep breath and stood up. I left the receipt and a $20 bill for the club soda on the table, a small thank you to the kind waiter, and walked, not toward the exit, but toward the host stand at the front of the restaurant. The same beautiful host who had seated me looked up, surprised to see me again so soon. I leaned in, keeping my voice low and professional, as if I were clarifying a simple logistical detail. "Hi there," I said, giving her a calm, confident smile. "I just wanted to make sure there's no confusion regarding my family's bill. The large party at table 7, the Richard party." "Yes," she asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "I was invited as a guest, but as you can see, I'm seated separately," I continued smoothly. "I've already paid for my own order. I just need you to ensure that the main bill for everything on their table is presented to them. To Richard, specifically, it should all be charged under his name. I wouldn't want any mix-up." I said it with such authority, such simple, direct clarity that she just nodded. To her, it probably made perfect sense. The estranged daughter, banished to the back, was making it clear she wasn't paying for the family that had ostracized her. "Of course," the host confirmed, making a quick note on her screen. "I will inform their server. The bill for table 7 will go to Mr. Richard." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate it." And that was it. The trap was set. I walked back to my lonely table, my legs feeling a little shaky. I picked up my glass of club soda and took a slow sip. The cold bubbles fizzed on my tongue. From my vantage point, I could still see them. The main courses were arriving. Huge plates of glistening steak, elaborate towers of seafood, creamy pasta for the kids. Then came the wine, not just a glass, but a bottle. The server presented it to my father, who waved a hand dismissively as if to say, "Yes, yes, the good stuff, just pour it." He didn't even look at the label. When you're not paying, the price doesn't matter. They were celebrating. But what? I scanned the table, looking for a clue, and then I saw it. Sitting next to Leo on the banquette was a briefcase. A new one made of expensive-looking leather. And Megan was wearing a brand-new, diamond-encrusted watch that glittered every time she moved her hand. Of course. This was a celebration for Leo. He must have gotten a huge promotion or a massive bonus. The shopping spree, the champagne, the most expensive restaurant in town, it was all for him. And they hadn't even bothered to tell me. Hay had invited me to witness his triumph from the cheap seats, expecting I would also finance it. The last vestiges of guilt I felt about my plan evaporated. This wasn't just an insult, it was an exploitation. They were using my success to fund the celebration of his. I sat there for 20 minutes, nursing my single drink, a ghost in their machine. I watched them laugh, eat, and drink with an abandon that only comes when you believe someone else is handling the consequences. It was the most painful and the most liberating 20 minutes of my life. I was finally seeing them for who they truly were, not as my family, but as a group of charming, entitled strangers who had mistaken my love for a line of credit, and it was about to be declined. The 20 minutes I spent at that tiny table were a masterclass in observation. Detached from the obligation to participate, to smile, to pretend I was having a good time, I could finally just watch. It was like seeing a play for the second time. You notice all the little details and foreshadowing you missed the first time around. I watched my father, Richard, hold court. He leaned back in his chair, a benevolent patriarch bestowing his attention on his favored child. He laughed loudest at Leo's jokes and listened with rapt attention as my brother described what I now fully believed was a major career victory. My dad, who once told me my job sounded terribly boring, was hanging on every word of Leo's marketing jargon. The hypocrisy was so blatant it was almost comical. I watched my mother, Carol Preen. She kept touching Megan's arm, admiring the new, glittering watch. She would smooth down my nephew's hair or wipe a smudge of chocolate from my niece's cheek with a theatrical flourish of maternal devotion. She was performing the role of the proud matriarch for the entire restaurant to see. Her gaze never once flickered in my direction. In the narrative she was creating, I didn't have a role. I hadn't even been cast as an extra. And I watched Leo and Megan. They were soaked in the glow of my parents' adoration, and they accepted it as their due. They didn't question it. They didn't look around and wonder why their sister and sister-in-law was sitting alone by the kitchen door. To them, the world was as it should be. The spotlight was on them, where it belonged. A second bottle of wine arrived at their table. It was a deep, dark red that I knew, even from a distance, was from the most expensive page of the wine list. They ordered a decadent-looking dessert platter to share, a mountain of chocolate lava cakes, creme brulee, and artisanal ice cream. My little nephew, Ben, who was usually forbidden from having too much sugar, was being fed spoonfuls of rich mousse directly by my mother. Tonight, the rules didn't apply. Tonight was about indulgence, about having it all. The kind waiter came back to my table to see if I needed anything else. I shook my head and gave him another smile. "I'm fine, thank you." He glanced over at the loud, laughing table in the center of the room, then back at me, his eyes full of a quiet understanding. He knew. In that strange, suspended moment, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. The pain of their rejection was still there, a low, thrumming ache deep in my chest, but it was no longer a fire threatening to consume me. It was more like the memory of a burn, a scar to remind me where the heat had been. I thought about my life, the one I had built for myself completely outside of their orbit. I thought about my small, bright apartment that was my sanctuary, decorated exactly to my taste, with no one to tell me it was wrong. I thought about my friends, the ones who had celebrated my partnership with champagne and cheers, who listened to my work stories with genuine interest, who saw me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. I had spent so long thinking my life was the lesser one because it wasn't the one my parents celebrated. I saw my independence as a consolation prize for not having the warm, enmeshed family life my brother had. But sitting there, watching that warm, enmeshed family in action, I realized my mistake. My life wasn't a consolation prize. It was the grand prize. My independence wasn't a weakness. It was my greatest strength. I had built a world where my worth wasn't determined by a seat at a table. They had meant to punish me, to put me in my place. But what they had actually done was set me free. They had finally, irrevocably, shown me the truth, and the truth was that I was better off alone than in their suffocating, conditional company. Their dessert plates were cleared. The kids were getting restless. My father signaled for the check with a grand, magnanimous wave, the gesture of a man who fully expected someone else to handle the mundane details of payment. This was the moment. The server, a different young man from the one who had tea, in their order, approached their table holding a leather bill folder. He moved with a crisp efficiency, placing it discreetly on the table, exactly in front of my father. I saw my mother nudge him, a silent command to take care of it. My father picked up the folder with a sigh, as if the very act of looking at a bill was beneath him. He flipped it open. And the calm was over. The storm had arrived. For a solid 5 seconds, nothing happened. My father, Richard, simply stared down at the piece of paper inside the leather folder. The boisterous, celebratory energy that had been radiating from their table vanished, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. The jovial expression on his face froze, melted, and then began to curdle into utter disbelief. He squinted, taking off his reading glasses and rubbing his eyes as if to clear them of a hallucination. He put them back on and looked again. His face, which had been flush with wine and good cheer, began to pale, starting around his mouth and spreading upwards. His jaw went slack. My mother, Carol, noticed the change immediately. Her smile faded and a look of concern crossed her face. "Richard, what is it? Is something wrong with the bill?" she asked, her voice a stage whisper. My father didn't answer. He just slowly, shakily, lifted the long white receipt from the folder. His eyes scanned down the list of items, his expression growing more horrified with each line item. The champagne, the appetizers, the filet mignon for him and Leo, the pan-seared scallops for the women. The second, even more expensive bottle of wine. The colossal dessert platter. The specialty mocktails for the kids that probably cost more than a cocktail at a normal bar. It was a testament to their unrestrained indulgence. He reached the bottom of the receipt. He saw the subtotal, the tax, and then the final, terrifying number at the very bottom, circled neatly by the server. His face, which had been pale, now began to turn an alarming shade of crimson. It started at his neck and blotched its way up to his hairline. He looked like a thermometer about to explode. Leo, my brother, finally picked up on the tension. "Dad, everything okay?" he asked, leaning forward. My father's head snapped up. He looked around the table, his eyes wide and wild, as if seeing them all for the first time. As if just now realizing what they had done. Then his gaze shot across the restaurant, past the other diners who were starting to sense the shift in atmosphere and locked directly onto me. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and dawning comprehension. And then he shouted. It wasn't just a raised voice. It was a bellow, a roar of pure, unadulterated shock that ripped through the genteel quiet of the Gilded Spoon. "What is this? Why is IT over $1,700? Every single person in the restaurant stopped what they were doing. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Conversations died. The servers paused in their tracks. 100 pairs of eyes turned towards our family's table. The bright, warm spotlight that my family had been basking in all night suddenly became a harsh, interrogating glare. My mother gasped, snatching the receipt from his trembling hand. Her eyes bugged out. $1,700, she shrieked, her voice cracking. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. My brother-in-law, Greg, choked on his water. Megan's hand flew to her mouth, her new diamond watch catching the light. Leo just looked utterly bewildered, his golden boy confidence evaporating in an instant. There's no mistake, my father yelled, slamming his fist on the table, making the water glasses jump. It's all here, the wine, the lobster. Who ordered the lobster? He was flustered, panicking, his kingly composure shattered into a million pieces. And then his fury found its target. His head swiveled back to me, his eyes narrowing into slits. In that moment, he wasn't my father. He was an accuser, and I was the accused. The entire real group turned in unison, a flock of startled, angry birds, and stared directly at me. My mother's face was a mask of cold fury. My brother, S, was a canvas of confusion and betrayal. They finally remembered I was there. The silence that followed the outburst was deafening. It was filled with the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. In their minds, there was only one possible explanation for this catastrophe. I had done something. I had failed in my duty. I had not performed my designated role as the silent, invisible financier of their perfect evening. I met their glares without flinching. I took a final, deliberate sip of my now-warm club soda, set the glass down with a soft click, and prepared myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. The sight of my father storming towards my little table was almost surreal. He moved with a purpose I hadn't seen in him in years, weaving through the maze of tables, his face a thundercloud of rage. Diners leaned away from him as he passed. He was a man on a mission, and that mission was me. He reached my table and planted both hands on its surface, leaning down so his face was level with mine. The smell of expensive wine and indignation rolled off him in waves. "Alex, what did you do?" he hissed, his voice a low growl, trying to regain some semblance of control now that he was closer. "You were supposed to handle this. Why isn't the bill on your card?" The question was so utterly, breathtakingly entitled that I almost laughed. Supposed to handle this? According to what agreement? What contract had I signed that stipulated I was the eternal benefactor of their whims? I looked up at him, my expression calm and unbothered. The adrenaline from before had been replaced by an icy resolve. I was no longer afraid. "I did handle it," I said, my voice even and quiet. "I handled my bill. I had a club soda. It was $5. I paid for it." His face contorted in confusion. "What? Your club soda? What about our bill, the family bill?" "There is no family bill," I replied, the words tasting like freedom. "There is my bill, which is settled, and there is the bill for the real group, which is on your table waiting for you." Mom was very clear about the distinction. The mention of my mother's words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his rage momentarily short-circuiting. He looked from me to my mother, who was now hurrying over, her face pale and pinched. "Richard, what is she saying?" Carol demanded, arriving at my side. She didn't look at me. She spoke to my father as if I were a malfunctioning appliance. Then her fury pivoted to me. "Alexandra, what is the meaning of this? How could you embarrass your father like this? How could you embarrass us?" This was my moment. This was the opening I had been waiting for my entire life. All the years of biting my tongue, of swallowing my hurt, of pretending it didn't matter. It all came to a head right here, next to the swinging kitchen doors of the Gilded Spoon. "Embarrass you," I said, my voice still quiet, but now laced with a steel they had never heard from me before. "You think I'm the one who should be embarrassed." I stood up so I could look them both in the eye. I was no longer the little girl begging for scraps of attention. I was a woman, a partner in a prestigious firm, and I was done. You invited me to a quick family dinner, I began, ticking the points off on my fingers. But you didn't wait for me. You sat at the best table and toasted a celebration you never even told me about. And then, Mom, you pointed to this table, this forgotten little corner by the kitchen, and you told me to sit here because you needed the space for the real group. Did you think I didn't hear you? Did you think I didn't understand what you meant? My mother flinched, her eyes darting around to see who was listening. The whole restaurant was listening. That's not what she started to stammer, but I cut her off. That is exactly what you said, I stated, my voice unwavering. And you know what? You were right. You are your own group, so you can have your celebration. You can have your fancy wine and your lobster and your big promotions. And you can have your $1,700 bill. That is the price of being the real group. Leo and Megan had crept closer, hovering a few feet away, looking utterly horrified by the public spectacle. Leo looked at me, his face a mixture of shock and, for the first time, a glimmer of shame. Alex, he started, but he didn't know what to say. Don't, Leo, I said, not unkindly. This isn't about you, not really. It's about a lifetime of being treated like an afterthought, a convenience, an ATM. I am done being your family's emergency fund. I am done funding parties I'm not truly invited to. I'm done being grateful for crumbs while you all feast at the banquet. I looked back at my parents. My father was speechless, his rage defeated by the sheer, undeniable truth of my words. My mother just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, the architect of this disaster unable to comprehend why her creation had blown up in her face. I paid for my drink, I said, picking up my small purse. I fulfilled my obligation as a guest at my own separate table. The rest is on you. I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked calmly and deliberately, my head held high, right past the host's stand, past the diners with their mouths agape, and towards the grand wooden doors. I could hear my mother start to wail my name, Alexandra, in a tone of utter panic. I could hear my father starting to argue with the restaurant manager, who was now approaching their table. I didn't look back. Pushing open the heavy door and stepping out into the cool night air was one of the most terrifying and exhilarating moments of my life. I felt light, as if I had just set down a suitcase I had been carrying for 29 years. The valet brought my car around, and I got in my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. I had done it. I had finally done it. I had stood up, spoken my truth, and walked away. The consequences would be immense, I knew. But as I drove away from the Gilded Spoon, leaving the real group to deal with the real bill, I wasn't scared. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely and utterly free. The immediate aftermath was a digital onslaught. Before I had even driven the 10 blocks back to my apartment, my phone started vibrating with a fury it had never known. The screen lit up with my mother's name. I ignored it. It rang again. Ignored. Then came a text, "You answer this phone right now." I let it go. Then my father started. A series of rapid-fire calls, one after the other. When I didn't pick up, his texts began. They were a masterclass in blame-shifting and emotional manipulation. How could you do this to your mother? She is completely distraught. You have humiliated this family in ways I can't even begin to describe. You owe us $1,743.68. I expect a check tomorrow. It was all there. The guilt, the shame, the financial demand. Everything except the 2 words I might have actually responded to, "I'm sorry." When I got to my apartment, I made a cup of tea, my hands still shaking slightly. I sat on my sofa and watched my phone light up again and again. Calls from Mom, calls from Dad, then a call from Leo. I hesitated for a moment before letting that one go to voicemail, too. His text came a minute later. It was different from our parents. "Alex, what was that? Call me. I had no idea Mom said that to you." It was the closest any of them had ever come to acknowledging my reality. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of something, a desire to explain, to make him understand. But I knew it was a fool's errand. Leo had spent his entire life benefiting from the system I was now rebelling against. He couldn't understand it, not really. His comfort depended on not understanding it. So I did the healthiest thing I could think of. I put my phone on silent, plugged it in to charge in the other room, and for the first time, I let their storm rage without me in the middle of it. I slept more soundly that night than I had in years. The next few days were a strange mixture of grief and relief. Every time I thought about the scene at the restaurant, a wave of panic would wash over me. Had I gone too far? Had I destroyed my family over one dinner? But then, the memory of my mother's words, the real group, would come flooding back, and the panic would subside, replaced by a grim certainty. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had just stopped pretending that it wasn't already broken. The relief was a quiet, steady presence. It was the feeling of not checking my phone with a sense of dread. It was the freedom of not having to mentally prepare for the next casual slight or backhanded compliment. I was grieving the family I wished I had, the family I saw at that center table, loving, united, celebratory. But I was also starting to accept that that family had never, ever included me. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. It was my mother's elegant handwriting on the front. It wasn't a letter bomb, but it might as well have been. Inside was a 3-page, handwritten letter. It was not an apology. It was a manifesto of my failings as a daughter. It detailed every dollar they had ever spent on me, from my childhood piano lessons to a contribution they'd made to my first car. It accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, and cold. It painted my quiet, focused nature as a character flaw and my professional ambition as a rejection of their family values. The letter ended with a final, chilling demand for the money for the dinner, framing it as the bare minimum I could do to begin to repair the damage I had caused. There was no mention of her words to me, no acknowledgement of the public humiliation. In her version of events, I was the sole aggressor, and their dinner was my innocent victim. I read the letter once, then a second time. I felt the old, familiar sting of tears welling in my eyes. The injustice of it was staggering. But this time, something was different. I wasn't crying for their lost love. I was crying for the years I had wasted trying to earn it. I walked into my home office, took out my own stationery, and wrote a reply. It was the shortest letter I had ever written. Dear Mom and Dad, enclosed is a check for $5 to cover the cost of my club soda. I believe this settles my account in full. Sincerely, Alex. I didn't send it. I wrote it for me, to see the words on paper, to solidify my resolve. Then I took both their letter and my unsent reply, walked them to the shredder in my office, and fed them through, piece by piece. I watched the angry, looping script and my own defiant response turn into a meaningless pile of confetti. That was the end. I blocked their numbers, I blocked their email addresses, I sent Leo one final text: I love you, but I need space. I can't be a part of the family dynamic anymore. I hope one day you'll understand. Then I blocked him too. It's been 6 months since that night at the Gilded Spoon. The silence has been profound. I have grieved and I have healed. I have poured my energy into my work, my friendships, and myself. I am thriving. My world is smaller now, but it is also kinder, safer, and infinitely more real. I have my own group, and I have a seat at the head of the table. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder about that evening. The rational part of me knows I did the only thing I could do, but the part of me that was raised to be the good girl still whispers doubts in my ear. So I have to ask, was I wrong for what I did? Should I have just swallowed my pride one more time, paid the bill, and maintained the toxic peace? Or was this the only way to make them understand, even if it meant losing them forever? I'm really not sure, and I'd love to know what you think. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human, navigating complex relationships and difficult choices. The beauty of sharing these stories is that they remind us that we are not alone in our struggles or our triumphs. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with someone who might appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.